Welcome to our channel. Get ready for a shocking tale as we uncover the strange reaction of Gene Hackman's daughter to an unimaginable tragedy. From hidden fortunes to chilling wills, the Hackman family's secrets have sent shockwaves through the public. But could her silence conceal a truth we've yet to uncover? If you love diving into Hollywood's deepest secrets, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to bring you more thrilling stories. Gene Hackman took his last breath in a house as cold as a tomb, the air thick with toxic gas. But the real shock wasn't his death. It was the silence that lasted 2 decades until Leslie finally broke it. The daughter who once lived in the shadows emerged not to grieve, but to expose a truth sharper than a knife. With every word, she carved into a legacy built on millions, turning it into something far darker. So what secrets lurk behind Leslie Hackman's cold eyes and cryptic words? Gene Hackman once ruled Hollywood with iconic roles in The French Connection, Unforgiven, Bonnie and Clyde, and Superman. His face graced magazine covers worldwide. He walked red carpets to roaring applause, bathed in flashing lights, and partied until dawn. But after 2004, he vanished without a farewell. No retirement announcement, no press conferences, no award show appearances. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Now his name lingers only in tribute articles or lists of Hollywood's last living legends. He withdrew further into silence, letting time erase his own legend. Leaving behind Hollywood's glare, Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa, 31 years his junior, sought refuge in Santa Fe, New Mexico, their sanctuary, a sprawling $3.8 million estate cradled by towering mountains. No flashing cameras, no star-studded parties, just the two of them, 3 dogs, and the quiet hum of passing afternoons. Locals say Hackman was rarely seen outside, but in the early mornings he would sometimes sit on the porch, coffee in hand, staring at the distant peaks lost in thought. The man who once commanded the screen in a police uniform had become a frail shadow of himself, his deep-set eyes harboring secrets never spoken. His life played out like an old film, slow and fragmented, each memory resurfacing the moment he closed his eyes. Betsy Arakawa, once doubted by Hackman's family when they wed, remained by his side longer than anyone. She cared for him with the precision of a seasoned nurse, measuring every pill, preparing every meal. But was it love in its purest form? Or was Betsy, like the Santa Fe house, a fortress that also became his cage, trapping him in a solitude he could never escape? Close friends who visited recalled that Gene Hackman seemed to become a different person after stepping away from Hollywood. He became quiet, avoided talking about his career, and never watched his own films. New scripts sent to him were outright rejected. Betsy Hackman admitted in his final interview, "I haven't watched my films in years. They belong to the past, not to me." From 2004 to 2024, for 20 years, Hackman lived like a ghost. Though his body was still there were no major events, no public appearances. The only time he was spotted was in 2023 when paparazzi caught Hackman and Betsy at a casual seafood restaurant. He appeared noticeably thinner, always leaning on his wife's arm when walking. Neighbors recall that Hackman's house was always closed off, but at night faint arguments could sometimes be heard. No one knew what was said, But Betsy always seemed to have the final word. An eerie energy surrounded the home, unsettling anyone who lingered too long. For 21 years, no public images surfaced of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. Their silence was like a velvet curtain closing on a legendary era while fueling endless conspiracy theories. Some believed Hackman spiraled into depression after leaving the spotlight. Others suspected Betsy had isolated him to control his fortune. Whatever the truth, Hackman chose silence, as if erasing himself from Hollywood history. Everyone in Hollywood knew that disappearing didn't mean being forgotten, but for Gene Hackman, it was a deliberate choice. He rejected every interview, even turning down a lifetime achievement. Oscar. People struggled to understand why a man who had given everything to his craft would abandon his own legacy. His silence was the first warning sign. No one who had lived under the bright lights for 40 years could simply vanish like that. What was he hiding? A buried family secret, a shocking will, or a personal torment so deep that he never even shared it with his first wife, Faye Maltz, or his 3 children. When the Santa Fe police call came in that night reporting 2 bodies in separate rooms and a mysteriously dead dog, the suspicions buried for 21 years exploded. Gene Hackman. The legend who once ruled the screen was now just a name in a coroner's report. The silence before the storm was merely the first chapter of a story far darker, longer, and more painful. A chapter that his daughter Leslie Ann Hackman couldn't hold back tears as she read the will in her hands. The dirt roads winding toward the upscale enclave on the outskirts of Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman and his wife lived in seclusion, always carried an eerie loneliness. The sun here, neither as golden as California nor as crisp as the East, cast a weary, aging light over everything, as if the sky itself was bracing for something to break. And in that fading glow, Hackman's million-dollar estate perched on a hill, gazing over the rolling mountains, silently guarding secrets no one dared to name. Neighbors rarely caught a glimpse of Gene Hackman or his wife outside. They skipped weekend wine gatherings, never attended church, and avoided the lively farmers' markets. If they were seen at all, they were nothing more than fleeting shadows, slipping behind the tall iron gate. Rumors swirled that at dawn around 6 a.m., when the sun still hid behind the mountains, Betsy would quietly step outside with their aging dog. She walked slowly, her eyes darting around as if wary of unseen watchers. The shaggy dog moved sluggishly, weighed down not just by age, but by the heavy unease that seemed to cling to the house. Less than 15 minutes later, Betsy would return with the dog, closing the gate so softly, as if afraid to wake the restless souls within the walls. Gene Hackman, since his heart had begun to fail him, rarely stepped beyond that door. The only outsider who ever crossed the threshold was a delivery woman, a middle-aged figure etched with years of hardship, always muttering a few words under her breath as she left. One day she leaned toward a neighbor and whispered, "They're hiding something in there, something big." No one knew if Betsy Arakawa had any close relationships beyond Gene Hackman, as she was intensely private. But an elderly neighbor living beside the Hackman estate swore Betsy often made hushed phone calls in the backyard. Her voice was barely audible yet. Every so often, a few chilling fragments slipped through the trees. "He's getting worse." "No, we can't let anyone know about this. This house isn't safe." Each call always ended with a soft sigh, as if Betsy carried the weight of an entire sky on her shoulders. Who was on the other end, a distant relative or someone guarding the Hackman family's secret? No one knew, but as the months passed, the calls became more frequent, and Betsy's face grew more etched with worry after each conversation. Gene Hackman's house, once hailed as an architectural masterpiece, blending into the wild beauty of nature, felt anything but warm to the rare few who stepped inside. It wasn't the chill of the climate or the design, but something deeper, an invisible sorrow hanging in the air. The walls were lined with countless framed photographs, yet none featured Hackman's 3 children. Only images of Betsy and Hackman on distant trips, sunsets over the ocean, forced smiles on vacations without family. The children who once filled their Los Angeles home with laughter had been erased from their father's world as if they had never existed. Gene Hackman never revealed his health struggles, but neighbors believed he battled a host of age-related ailments from heart disease to arthritis and spinal degeneration. Yet his most crippling affliction wasn't physical, but the invisible weight of an obsession that haunted him. Like Marlon Brando, Katharine Hepburn, and Greta Garbo before him, Hackman faced the great tragedy of Hollywood's golden age, being forgotten while still alive. For a man who had dominated the box office for decades, watching himself fade into obscurity, reduced to nothing more than a relic of the past, may have been the most devastating illness of all. Betsy once confided to a neighbor in a rare moment of conversation, Gene doesn't watch his old films. He says they belong to another life. It was his way of severing the final thread tying him to Hollywood, to the golden past he had left behind. But in the dead of night, when the house was silent, Betsy would find him standing by the bedroom window, staring at the distant mountains, muttering something to himself, words lost in the darkness. Those whispers behind the door weren't the wind or illusions, they were Gene Hackman's unfinished conversations with himself. The man who once stood under Hollywood's dazzling lights. The man who once believed that spotlight would never dim. But when the door closed, the camera stopped flashing, and the world moved on. All that remained was Gene Hackman, an old, lonely man wandering the halls of his own million-dollar home. Outside, beyond the cold iron fence, life carried on. No one remembered Gene Hackman, except for the whispers waiting to take shape in the darkness. The million-dollar house on the New Mexico hillside, once filled with whispered secrets and cryptic midnight calls, now stood as a cold, lifeless crime scene. Red and blue police lights flickered against the adobe walls, casting eerie shadows across the evening sky. Local residents gathered behind wooden fences, their eyes fixed on the house that had remained silent for so many years, trying to piece together the mystery hidden within. But the police hadn't arrived in response to a distress call or the sound of screams. They had broken down the door because the silence itself had become too strange to ignore. The delivery woman, a middle-aged figure worn by years of hardship, was the first to notice the strange odor. It wasn't the stench of decomposition nor the damp musk of mold, but an unsettling mix of chemicals and rotting flesh. When investigators forced the door open, they weren't met with chaos, but an eerie stillness. Inside, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa lay in separate rooms, their bodies decayed yet untouched by any signs of struggle. Hackman rested on his back in bed, the blanket pulled to his chest, as if he had simply drifted off to sleep. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly open. No bruises, no wounds, just the quiet finality of a body that had stopped breathing. In the next room, Betsy Arakawa was slumped beside the bed, her hand still clutching the landline phone, one of the last remnants of their past life. The screen showed no outgoing call. No one knew if she had tried to dial for help or if she had been the first to realize that something in the house had gone terribly wrong. Her lifeless eyes remained fixed on the window where the last light of the afternoon faded into darkness. The three dogs that had shared the quiet isolation of Gene and Betsy's world were still there when the police arrived. Two were alive, trembling beside their owners' bodies, their eyes red with fear and exhaustion. But the oldest dog, the one Betsy had walked every morning, lay lifeless in the hallway between the two bedrooms. No signs of trauma, no blood, no struggle. It had simply ceased to be like falling into a final sleep. But why had two survived while one did not? Was the gas strong enough to take them all, or had something happened before it spread? Was it mere chance, or had someone decided that only one four-legged life would end? The forensic team wasted no time inspecting the heating system, gas pipes and appliances, but what they found sent chills down everyone's spine. There were no carbon monoxide leaks, no forgotten stoves, no faulty wiring. The toxic gas that filled the house hadn't come from the house itself. A quick analysis left the investigation team speechless. Hydrogen sulfide traces lingered in the air, a deadly gas carrying the scent of rotten eggs, nearly undetectable at low levels. But the real mystery was its source. It wasn't from the pipes, the drains, or the ventilation system. It had been introduced either from an external source or, more disturbingly, from within the house itself. Gene Hackman's body bore no signs of struggle, nor did Betsy Arakawa's, except for the fact that she had reached for the phone as if trying to call for help. Could their deaths have been an accident staged to mimic a natural gas leak? But if so, why was there a gas present that didn't belong in this house? The questions stacked up like invisible walls closing in around the house. Did Gene die before or after Betsy, who was the first to notice the gas? Who was Betsy trying to call in her final moments? And if this was murder, who could be cold and patient enough to take the lives of an elderly couple in such a calculated way? The cruelest irony was that while Gene Hackman's children had long accepted that their 94-year-old father's time would come, they never imagined it would arrive like this, taking Betsy with him. The wife, who should have been arranging his funeral instead, lay lifeless beside him. No one knew if they had a joint will or separate ones. No one knew what their final words to each other had been. And the biggest question of all, were Betsy's secret phone calls connected to the invisible poison that filled the house? Or was she just another victim in a long-planned conspiracy? As the white sheets draped over the two bodies, the million-dollar house fell silent once more. But this time there was no one left to guard its secrets. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were laid to rest in a quiet funeral, mirroring the solitude of their final years. No reporters, no flashing cameras, just a handful of family members paying their last respects. Yet beneath that silence, an undercurrent of unease stirred. Unanswered questions lingered in the air, suspicious glances passed between those left behind, and the truth remained buried, just like the legends they once were. No one was prepared for the shock of losing both Gene and Betsy at once, but that grief paled in comparison to the earthquake that followed, when Gene's personal lawyer revealed a final will updated just months before their deaths. A will that didn't just redistribute millions but unearthed financial secrets, unusual investments, shady transactions, and most of all, the widening fractures within the Hackman family. The sealed envelope was opened, the lawyer's voice steady, yet tense, as he read through each clause. The estate, valued at $80 million, included real estate stocks, liquid cash, and anonymous investment accounts. But it wasn't the fortune itself that sent chills through the room. It was how it was divided, a cold slap that no one saw coming. Nearly 40% of the estate went to Betsy Arakawa, Gene's wife, 3 decades his junior. Another 20% was split evenly among his 3 children from his first marriage. 10% was allocated to an educational arts charity, a choice that raised no eyebrows. But it was the remaining 30% that sent a ripple of unease through the room, placed into a secret trust with strict conditions. It would remain untouched for a decade after Gene's death, and the beneficiary's identity would not be revealed immediately. Who was meant to inherit this hidden fortune? And why did Gene choose to divide his legacy in such an unsettling way? The lawyer explained that because Gene and Betsy died almost simultaneously, there was no way to determine who passed first under New Mexico's inheritance laws when the order of death cannot be proven. The estate is treated as if both died at the same time. This meant that the portion of Gene's wealth designated for Betsy would not automatically transfer to her family. Instead, it reverted back to Gene's common estate. Suddenly, his 3 biological children, who had originally been left with 20%, now faced the unexpected possibility of inheriting a share of Betsy's assets, a woman they never truly saw as a mother. In the end, Betsy became an invisible figure in her own husband's will, her name written in ink, but her presence erased by the legal system. At the funeral, they stayed silent, but once the lawyer's office door shut, decades of buried resentment detonated like a ticking time bomb. Leslie Hackman, Gene's eldest daughter, was the first to break the silence. Her voice trembling, whether from grief or fury, no one could tell. "Betsy is not our mother. Don't make us play the part of the happy family." David, the second son, scoffed 40% of the estate for a woman who never gave him a child, while his own blood gets less than a quarter. The memories came rushing back, awkward family dinners, Betsy's attempts to bridge the gap only to be met with cold indifference. To Leslie and David, Betsy was the woman who stepped into their father's life when he was already rich and revered. But to Gene, she was the only one who stayed when the Hollywood lights faded. Did Gene truly trust Betsy? Or did his cold, calculated will conceal unspoken doubts about his final years? As the estate inventory unfolded, a shocking discovery surfaced: a series of anonymous investment accounts. Gene Hackman, a man who had never shown interest in cryptocurrency, had quietly amassed significant shares in AI and biotechnology firms. Stranger still, just weeks before his death, he transferred nearly $2 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Why would a veteran actor in the twilight of his life engage in such cryptic financial moves? Was he safeguarding a secret or covering up something far more sinister? After leaving the lawyer's office, Leslie sat silently in the car, tears rolling down her face, not just for the loss of her father, but for the brutal truth that had unraveled before her eyes. The man she once idolized wasn't just a loving father, he was also a calculating strategist. Financial secrets, shady transactions, hidden wealth painted a version of Gene Hackman she had never known. The man who once watched movies with her every night had lived a life of carefully guarded mysteries. Maybe we never really understood him. Leslie whispered. That multi-million-dollar inheritance, instead of binding the family together, became a blade that sliced through the last fragile threads of affection. A vast fortune traded for a shattered legacy. Gene Hackman had once been a box office titan. He lacked the chiseled looks of a leading man, the effortless charm of Hollywood's golden idols. Yet he was exactly the kind of actor the industry craved. A force of nature who didn't just perform, but lived every role he reigned through the 70s and 80s. A king without a crown, commanding the screen in The French Connection, Mississippi Burning, and Unforgiven. Hackman didn't just act, he embodied the classic American man. Tough, relentless, unyielding. In him, audiences saw the wrinkles of a fading era, the cracks in the American dream, the ghosts of men forgotten by time, until one day he too became one of them. In 2004, Gene Hackman walked away from Hollywood. No grand farewell, no final blockbuster, no sentimental goodbye, just silence. His official reason was health, but everyone knew that was just the surface. The truth was, Hollywood had no place left for men like Hackman. The icons of serious cinema where scripts and raw performance reigned had become relics of the past. The industry he once helped shape had transformed into a spectacle-driven machine, where young faces, superheroes, and CGI spectacles buried the old guard. No one called Hackman anymore. The producers and directors who once fought for his name on a contract had moved on quietly, letting his legacy fade like an old, forgotten memory. Gene Hackman didn't retire. Hollywood retired him. After stepping off the silver screen, he and Betsy retreated to New Mexico, a place untouched by flashing cameras or star-studded parties. People questioned why a legend would choose to vanish into the quiet desert. But the answer was as simple as it was heartbreaking. Hollywood no longer needed him. In New Mexico, he was just another old man. His million-dollar estate, meant to be a peaceful retreat, became a prison without bars where time moved, but life stood still. Interview requests grew scarce, then disappeared. Award ceremonies came and went without his name being called. No tributes, no lifetime achievement, honors, as if Hollywood had silently erased him from its history. Gene Hackman spent his final years like a ghost king, a ruler without a throne, abandoned by the very kingdom he once commanded. The cruelest irony was that his greatest final role was never captured on film. No script, no director, no stage. Just four walls, a few aging dogs, and a wife watching the slow fading of the man. She once knew Hackman was never afraid of death. He had once said, "If one day I die alone, I won't be surprised." That's the fate of those who live too long with the spotlight. But his death was more than an ending. It was a sentence, a brutal fate. Hollywood reserved for those who dared to grow old, refused to bow, and lived too honestly to be remembered. Gene Hackman didn't die from old age or illness. He died because Hollywood had killed him long before. Hollywood once loved him, worshipped him like a box office gold mine, but that love was as fleeting as a discount ticket on a Monday. The moment he stopped bringing in profits, stopped collecting Oscars, stopped giving them something to talk about, that love vanished. Hollywood's love for Hackman was the deadliest kind. It embraced him when he was useful, then discarded him the second he became a burden. Gene Hackman was not alone. He was part of a generation that built Hollywood's golden age, when talent and dedication were revered, but loyalty was fleeting. Peter O'Toole, the legend of Lawrence of Arabia, passed in silence without a crowd to mourn him. Burt Reynolds, once the ultimate symbol of masculinity, spent his last years drowning in financial ruin. Mickey Rourke, cast aside by the industry, fought desperately to reclaim his name. Gene Hackman's story was the story of them all, a generation that gave everything lived beyond the shallow glamour of Hollywood and accepted aging with grace. But Hollywood has no room for those who no longer shine brightly. His death was more than the loss of a legend. It was another quiet note in the industry's cruel song of forgetting Hollywood builds its gods only to discard them when they are no longer profitable. Betsy, in her final phone call, once said, "Gene always knew who he was. It was Hollywood that forgot him." His passing was not just an end, but a haunting reminder of how the industry buries those who made it great. Gene Hackman passed away on a gray, quiet afternoon, without farewells, without fanfare. The news of his death barely rippled through Hollywood, just as his final years in the New Mexico desert had faded into obscurity. No national memorials, no crowds outside his home, no candles, no flowers, just a handful of articles, a few recycled career retrospectives, and then silence. Gene Hackman was once a legend, but when the curtain fell, he was nothing more than a name, buried beneath legal documents, tax forms, and the final will of a forgotten star. And in those papers, fragments of an untold story emerged. His will didn't just divide his millions. It left behind a trail of unanswered questions, secrets that had been locked away for decades. A portion of his wealth, hidden behind unnamed investments and offshore transactions, formed a financial labyrinth so intricate that even his personal lawyer struggled to untangle it. Why would an actor who once condemned tax evasion quietly move assets beyond U.S. borders? And why, in his final months, did he revise his will? Cutting some family members, adding unfamiliar names, and leaving undisclosed sums to an anonymous NGO. Gene Hackman's death was not just the end of a Hollywood legend, it was the beginning of a mystery one that left more questions than answers. Gene Hackman's death was initially ruled as complications from chronic heart disease and old age. But soon, chilling whispers emerged from local New Mexico newspapers. A new theory surfaced, one that pointed to toxic gas inside his home. A small yet dangerous amount of carbon monoxide was detected in the aging ventilation system, just enough to induce fatigue hallucinations and a slow decline in health. Strangely, that same system had been inspected just months before his death, with no signs of a leak. Had this been an accident, or had someone turned his multi-million-dollar mansion into a silent death trap? And more importantly, could Hackman's hidden financial dealings be tied to his mysterious passing? Local police opened an investigation, but when Hollywood looked away, the case faded into silence, just like the man himself. Leslie wept before the media, not just for the loss of her father, but for the bitter sting of betrayal. She had believed that after years of distance, she and Hackman had finally found their way back to each other, but his final will, cold, calculated, and unyielding, told a different story. When a legend falls, it's not just tears that are shed, but blood, betrayal, and wounds that never heal. If Hollywood were a house, Gene Hackman was one of the men who laid its foundation, brick by brick. Yet when he passed, Hollywood didn't even glance back. No official memorial, no grand retrospective, no special film festival to honor him. Some younger industry insiders even whispered, "Gene Hackman. Who's that?" This is Hollywood, where the line between immortality and irrelevance is as thin as a breath. The same industry that once hailed Hackman as a titan, now fixated on younger, shinier stars, easily marketed and easily forgotten. Gene Hackman, once hailed as the uncrowned king of Hollywood, died as a stranger in the very industry he had poured his sweat and soul into. They no longer needed him, and his passing was reduced to a footnote buried beneath a flood of disposable entertainment news. But those tapes will never be made public. The Hackman family remained silent. The media moved on, and Gene Hackman's secrets were buried with him, at least until someone bold or ruthless enough decides to unearth them. Maybe one day those tapes will surface, revealing that Hackman didn't simply die from old age, but from the dark secrets that had shadowed him throughout his life. But that day has not yet come. The curtain has fallen, and Gene Hackman, the betrayed king, is now just another ghost in Hollywood. He is gone, taking his decayed truths to the grave. And the multi-million-dollar empire he left behind is not an inheritance but a blood curse, where those who remain must pay the price in tears, suspicion, and wounds that will never heal. As we peel back the layers of Gene Hackman's legacy, his daughter's strange reaction only deepens the mystery. Is there more happening behind the scenes than we realize? What secrets did Hackman take to his grave? We may never know the full truth, but one thing is certain. His final years were far from ordinary. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And as always, stay tuned, because the truth is never as simple as it seems.